Okay. Graham? Hey,
Morning.
come in, come in. So this is Graham Sherman, our assistant winemaker, cousin, first cousin.
Good morning.
And, good morning. So we're finally going to do that port tasting that we wanted to do months ago.
Yeah.
We just got a little busy
Yeah.
in between with harvest and a fire season and two bottling but harvest is done, everything is okay, and we hopefully going to be able to enjoy ourselves a little bit now, and I think the port tasting will be a good way to celebrate maybe the end of the season and the beginning of the holiday celebrations.
Mm-hmm.
So
So what do
you
we?
tasted the port, our port, many times, obviously, in the winery, but you have never done with us a comparative tasting.
Correct.
Now, for us, it's not blind because we have tasted those ports so many times that we know immediately which one is ours and which one are the Portuguese port.
Okay.
For you, it will be interesting to see your reaction because you have not. You know our port, but you don't know the other one in relation. So we'll see what you feel about them.
So you were telling us a little bit about these wines.
Yes, so we have our two blend, Prince of Art number 5 and Prince of Art number 7, and two of the top Portuguese port, among our favorite port in Portugal, Dar and Quinta do Noval Nacional, which is a very small production of the Quinta do Noval.
Okay.
And we chose very good vintage. The Quinta do Noval is 2016, and the Dar is actually 2011, which is really rich. They're both 100-point wine, basically. And we have tasted our port many times, Graham and I, against Graham and Fonseca and Taylor and in the top years, and all those houses have slightly different style, but we just wanted to see where do we fit compared to those iconic ports.
Okay.
And for you it would be interesting because you never tasted ours compared to the Portuguese.
Yeah, correct.
So we'll see, curious to see what your reaction will be.
Great. Well, should we jump in here and
Go ahead.
give it a test?
Yeah, I mean, for us, I mean, for me, for sure, I immediately know which one are ours, but that's normal after tasting that maybe all the time. We start to memorize our own. But they both.
They all smell fantastic.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of the fun and the goal is we also, similar to the Portuguese, want to have a house style, and
Yeah.
we tried to do comparative tastings versus Californian ports, and we couldn't find anything that we were happy with. So.
We tried quite hard, I would say. But I remember you asked me the question, what was the motivation for us even to try to start?
Yeah. What was your inspiration for wanting to make your own port?
We started, the first vintage was in 2007, and we have been making port basically every year since.
Okay.
The idea is, I always loved port. My wife and I have been port lovers for a long time. It's a great after dinner drink, a little sipping. Sometimes actually I love it with some cheese,
Mhm.
like
Yep.
gorgonzolas or it's interesting mix. But as a little sipping drink after dinner, it's wonderful. So having a vineyard here, we were kind of almost born to one day to try to see if we could make port. Studying the grapes that are grown in Portugal to make their port. It found out that actually over 100 varietals of grapes are allowed in Portugal legally
Okay.
to make port. So I don't want to be facetious, but almost everything that grows in Portugal theoretically can go into port.
Sure.
But they usually use about 4, 5, 6 varietal,
Okay.
and they all are. Let's not forget Portugal is a hot and humid country. Maybe not the greatest to make fine wine, but perfectly suited to make alcoholic wine. And in the case of port, with the fortification, they can stop the fermentation and keep a residual sugar, and the addition of alcohol will protect the wine forever. Because no bacteria, no yeast will grow in the fortified wine. So in 2007, we studying what grapes are used in Portugal to make port over there, we realized that here in California we have grapes that are perfectly suited to make exceptional port. Mm-hmm. Because in Portugal they use grapes that have high tannin, like Cabernet Sauvignon. They use grapes that have fruitiness, like the Merlot. They use grapes that have high note, like Cabernet Franc. And a lot of grapes that are just high sugar content grapes.
Gotcha.
That here in California we don't want, because with the beautiful sun we have, we will make wine at 17% alcohol naturally.
Sure.
So we try to actually eliminate those grapes that have a high alcohol content. And so we tried for several years using what they call the Cellular Method, where basically you add to your previous vintage the best lot of the new vintage, and you keep adding year after year. Okay. So we ended up in 2013 with quite a few barrels of port going back from all those previous years, starting from 2007. Then in 2013, we realized that some of that quality was really going up, to our surprise, and that we should keep separate lot. So we made our port from Merlot, we made our port from Cabernet Sauvignon. Before we were mixing everything, and then we started separating them, fermenting them separately, keeping different lot, using different barrel to age them.
Yeah. So
having a lot of.
What are some of our techniques that we use here to make our port? Or what's
at the beginning
special?
we were using 100% French oak,
Okay.
new oak, and we started using, after some recommendation from our friends, coopers from France that are visiting every year, they recommended that we should use some old cognac barrel. And when I mean old cognac, 30, 40, 50 years old cask that contain cognac. So the wood is infused with cognac, and it gives a layer of complexity that is really unique. So we started doing that, and we started also experimenting with different type of barrel. It's a little bit of kitchen secret
Sure.
on what we use, but we try. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. But we found ways to basically increase the complexity of the port during the aging.
We should point out, technique-wise, that in the estate wines, we're so obsessive compulsive about things like topping and sulfur additions, and everything is micromanaged. And we treated the port that way and quickly found out that it wanted less attention. And so every time we backed off and let it make itself, it kept getting better and better.
That's true. I remember when, and after you went to Portugal, and you had the chance to visit and spend some time at Quinta de Noval. They gave you a few good tips over there too, and we found out that we were treating our port like the fine wine, topping them, on a regular basis, making sure they have no air exposure. And we found out, no, you don't want to do that. You want some air exposure because you want to get that, what they call the rancio, that oxidative characteristic that is also a beneficial element in port.
Sure.
We were keeping our port, also our barrel, in cold area of the cave, and we were so, oh no, you need a little warmer area in the cave actually to store your barrel. So we learn. I mean,
Sure.
14 years in the making, we learned a few things.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and after we adapted those less intrusive techniques, we could just see, even after that first month, the ports started to evolve and get better and
That's
better.
right,
And
that's right.
at this point, every time we taste it, the level keeps getting lower and lower, and it just keeps tasting better and better each time.
Then another major improvement in our port making was when we got the optical sorters.
Sure, yeah, I was going to ask. I heard.
First 1 year we got the first optical sorter, then the second optical sorter, and for the past 4 years now we had those 2 optical sorters in line, and we had a program designed specifically to sort the berries and select the high sugar content
Okay.
berries that we don't want for the fine wine program, because they will bring, the only thing they will do is raise the alcohol level and actually impart a little plum, fig flavor.
Okay.
We call in winemaking port flavors, and in this case it's a negative, but selecting them to make port, those berries are just perfect.
Sure.
So that was an essential tool of improvement to have the optical sorter, because they can, in 2 or 3 thousandths of a second, check the berries and sort them out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the benefits of that is we're able to pick clusters where sometimes the ripening across a cluster is varied, and so we can pick when the full cluster is ripe, even if there is some sun damage on the sun exposed side, and select, we'll select those berries out, use them for the port program as they're perfectly poised to be part of, and then make the estate wine out of the remainder.
So, again, year after year after year, we saw our quality going up, and Graham started making some blend, and we played with it, and tested them against Portuguese port. And we don't want to be pretentious, but we felt that somehow we were I'm not going to say we're not equal. The idea is not to be equal. The idea is to have a quality of port here that is representative of the flavors of our estate, and then can be in the family of the top producers of Portugal. There's nothing in California that prohibits us to make port at the level of Portugal. We have all the grapes, we have a perfect climate for that to and we have the equipment.
Sure.
You know, if we like the tradition and the 300 years that they have been making, we fast learners.
Yeah, you had a really good story the other day down at the winery, kind of explaining the history of port.
Yeah.
Could you remind me of that story?
Yeah, sure. I mean, port is basically 320 years old. You know, it all started when in 1700, England, who was buying Bordeaux wine, going back to Eleanor d'Aquitaine, who was married, a French princess that was married to an English king. Great relationship between and that region of Bordeaux and the British, and massive amount of wine was exported to England. And in 1700, again, Europe is at war. The French are allied to Spain at that time. England was allied to the Dutch Republic and Austria. And England raised their tariff of imported goods 400%. The French responded to that by banning export of wine and eliminating importation of English cloth. And so the British had to find another alternative to find wine. And they couldn't buy it from Spain because Spain was allied with France.
Sure.
So they had to go further down, and Portugal was the obvious closest choice. The only problem is in Portugal, on the coastal area of Portugal, it's warm and humid.
Okay.
And it's not a great area to make fine wine. You know? So their wine were kind of lean, acidic, and you know, the lack of understanding about sanitation also. They didn't make the journey to England. They spoiled.
Okay.
So the British merchant tried to go further up inland and avoid those coastal areas, and hoping that going up the Douro River, on the steep terrace of that river, they will find vineyard that will produce, will be able to produce better grapes, which they did. And the story is that apparently two brothers had the idea of adding brandy to the wine to protect them during the trip, and it did, because the alcohol addition killed the yeast and stabilized the wine, and the higher octane of the beverage suited the Brits well. You know, they got a big bang for their buck, and it became an instant success. So in 1703, Portugal and England passed some treaties. It's called actually the Port Treaty, and that was the beginning of the port industry, 1703.
Okay.
Now, the way port is made now is not by adding brandy to the finished wine. It's by adding alcohol, brandy, at certain point of the fermentation. And Graham, you can explain a little bit that instead of, like before, they were taking wine, adding alcohol in it. That's not how port is made.
And one of the things that I learned visiting over there was the purity of your brandy or alcohol is really important to the quality of the ports.
Yes.
So one of the innovations, we had made brandy here many years ago, and it from wine, but it was actually starting to pick up barrel character and things from storage over time. And so now we use a triple distilled, very pure form of alcohol, which doesn't interact with the natural flavors that make the Blankiet port so unique.
On some of the lot where we want to preserve the purity of fruit, that's when we use the neutral alcohol.
Yeah.
Now, the brandy that we make from grapes, from our vineyard, from wine that we send to a distillery and they they column distill the wine and give us back grape brandy at 170 proof.
Okay.
We age that in a oak barrel, French oak barrel. And we have cognac. We make basically cognac. Now that's a tool also in stopping fermentation, but it has a flavor. So you have to use that as not only a tool to stop fermentation, but you have to, in minuscule amount, because of the flavors it imparts.
Sure.
But it has an interesting flavor. So it's a combination of different type of alcohol there.
So this whole process has seemed, it's been more of a journey for you. And then, we've talked about, our technology and what we do in the winery, but I also see these amazing bottles here.
Yeah.
And I know that our bottles are very special. So I was
Yeah.
kind of curious as to what your inspiration was for that.
So, Catherine and I are, kind of crazy collectors. It's a disease that we have, and we always contaminating each other, so nobody can get rid of that disease.
Sure.
Of collecting things. We lack objects. So looking at auction catalog, I started seeing old bottles, and I realized that in the 17th and 18th century, the bottles were hand blown at the time. They didn't have the technique to mold glass.
Okay.
So glass was expensive, very, very expensive. Mirrors were horribly expensive because, they had to be polished by hand, and bottles were hand blown. So they use a shape that is characteristic of the time, what they call the onion shape.
Okay.
And those are that's 17th century from Spain. It was a nice spot.
Yeah. Take a look.
This one is Spanish, 17th century. So all around Europe, England, Netherlands, Germany, France, Italy, they all started using similar shaped bottle. This also is a bottle of that time, but that was found in an excavation. So all that great incrustation is basically mineral that got deposited on the glass and kind of fused to the glass. I wish I could find a technique to replicate that. So I love those bottles. And in movies, pirates, their rum bottle.
Sure.
Well, they were onion bottle. They were like that. Well, it makes a lot of sense, because if you're on a ship where the table are doing that all the time, those will stay on the table.
Sure.
They will not topple.
Yeah.
And that shape disappeared in the 19th century when they automated glass and fused a molded glass, and they standardized the shape of bottle. And since then, with little variation, all the bottles have the regular shape we used to.
Used today, yeah.
So I know it might be an issue for some consumers who say, well, I'm going to put that, it's not going to fit in my wine cellar. Well, the good thing about port, you can keep them standing up anyway for quite a while, so you don't have to worry about it. And when they empty, when you drink them, you can put olive oil in it, you can put vinegar in it, you can put a nice flower. They're nice looking.
Yeah, sure.
So we were looking for a producer, that was, and of course nobody was making bottle like that. So finally found, after a year of search, we found one in Italy that was willing to make a little run for us. And they made those two bottles over there that have 500 milliliters that are in the inspiration of the onion bottle. Then we realized, okay, now we have the bottle, but we cannot put a label on it because the surface is curved on both sides. So no label can really fit. So we had to figure out how to pad print and bake the inscription in the back. And then we had a seal, a wax seal. But again, because of the curved surface, the wax seal didn't want to stick.
Sure.
So we had to figure out a way to warm up those wax seal. And we had somebody in England, the best engraver in England, make the seal of our logo that created a really fine impression on the wax. I mean, we spent a lot of time playing with that. All those that I think we like to do, we even know for the longest time if we're ever going to bottle and commercialize any of the port. But beside the package, I think the quality that is in the bottle also is warranting the bottling. Now tell us a little bit about your trip to Quinta, because that was an interesting visit that you had over there.
Yeah, I had a great time with the producer who we buy our corks from. Invited me on a trip, and it was so interesting and fascinating because exactly like we discussed, it taught us that we have to be a little less attentive to the port because it benefits from oxidation and those characters that come out through time. And one of the fascinating things that I found going through various houses is the attention to detail in the vineyard was very evident at Quinta de Noval versus other places, and I feel like that was an analogy to here, where I felt like our attention to detail in the vineyard was mirrored at that great estate. And they are these incredible hand-built terraces that with old vines basically clinging to the sides of the hills, and they unlike anyone, I felt like really focused on that vineyard aspect, which is a pivotal point of the philosophy here at Blankiet Estate. So to me, it felt in some senses like home. It's very different wines, very different varietals.
So there are very steep terraces over there. I have not seen those terraces in Portugal, but I know, and you have also, we spoke of that many times, in Austria on the Danube River, or in Germany on the Moselle or the Rhine. You have, or the Rhone Valley actually in some area, where you have terraces that, you have to be, they tied up with ropes.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, because you'll kill yourself trying to work on those terraces. The steepness is just unbelievable, and they do that to capture the maximum sun radiation.
And you can absorb some of that heat in the stonework as well, and help brighten things.
At night, the heat.
Yeah, at Quinta de Noval, they even figured out how to somehow, I think it was actually more convenient than tractors on the terraces, as they still have horses that go down to do some of the plowing and soil work. So maybe an idea for our vineyard manager, George. We'll see how he likes that idea.
A little softer on the earth, maybe?
Yeah, I think one of the important lessons is honoring all those years of tradition that they have in Portugal and applying what we do well here in the Napa Valley and at Blankiet Estate, and understanding how to have a philosophical approach. But I think you said it best, Claude, is that we're trying to make something unique. And I love in Portugal the variation in house style. There's always this little bit of a signature where you're tasting it, you can tell it's a Graham's, it's a Dow, and the goal here, I think, is to have that signature house style while also expressing the purity of the place and creating a distinctive wine.
So our number 5 was, in a way, an homage to Dow.
Okay.
Dow has a fruitiness, a characteristicness of beautiful fruit. Quinta is a little more structured, as maybe what we felt a little more caramelization. It's a little more tony in characteristic. So our homage to the Quinta is a number 7 blend, where we use different barrels that give that what we call the pineapple flambe. You know, remember a dish in France, in the old classical tradition thing, where they would come table side and put slice of the pineapple, a little batter, and cognac, and flambe the thing. And
Sure.
And the first time we were tasting with our friend from Taranceau and Hennessy, they were surprised by those barrels and said, "Oh my God, pineapple flambe, pineapple flambe," and they were right. And that is one of the barrels that we use in our blend to maybe give that taste. So those are basically homage to those great producers. For us, I don't know if you have any preference? Do you have, they're all good. I know that we're all good. Obviously, they're all the Portuguese.
I think kind of what you both have said previous, which I completely agree with, is that they're all fantastic and that they all kind of have their own signature, and they're all quite different, which I think is amazing. I mean, but they all stand together. I mean, where they all have a lot of structure and fruitiness, but complexity as well. And if I had to pick, say my top is probably the Red Star right now. For me, that would be my top pick for now.
Okay. Well, I know what the Red Star. I know. I've not seen the list, but
Yeah.
I think I know.
Yeah.
Do you have the
Do we have the list?
the secret list?
I think Biddy has it.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, this is probably our number 7,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you retain your job.
and the yellow here is probably our number 5.
Yeah.
And I will think the silver is the Dar, and this is the Quinta.
Yeah. These two, I mean, they have a little more acid than what I was expecting.
Acid is a very important thing in port, because to make sweet alcoholic liquid, that's not difficult, but you have the right acidity with
Sure.
it. That's a different story. And we're fortunate here in our site, because natural acidity and high acidity is a little bit of a characteristic of our site, due probably to the influence of the San Francisco Bay, where we get that cold air flowing through the canyon all the time, you know, and I think it's a very important element in our port, is that still that freshness that you get from the acidity.
Yeah, they're all extremely
It's not
balanced.
cloying, you know. Otherwise, if you just sweet and alcoholic, you're going to be cloying. It's going to be tiring. You know,
Sure.
your mouth get tired real quick.
Sure.
It's one of those qualities we value in the other wines from the
Yes.
estate as well, is
Yeah.
this sort of mouth-watering desire to continue sipping. I think that's an important characteristic and something we strive for in the style.
So we basically are in the process of doing our first little release. We're going to, it's going to be packaged in a nice wooden box, and it's going to be a bottle of each. And we'll see how it's received, and probably next year we might just do single package and sell one blend or the other in multiple quantities. But I still would love to. I need to find somebody who makes Magnum like that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I love that
That'd be
bottle.
cool.
And you know, and everything was function, you know, in the old days. You know, those bottles they were to be refilled. And you go to the cellar and you grab them like that. You know, it made sense. If you look at, you know, the slight imperfection, you know, here we make things too perfect. You know, the glass has to be all shiny like a mirror. No, we want to. The artisanal.
Yeah,
artisanal part.
celebrate the artisanal and
Yeah.
kind of like the uniqueness of it.
It's nature and man, okay? It's nature and man, and nothing is perfect in either realm.
And it's a wonderful explanation of what I learned in Portugal, is that nature is going to control, and we can't overly manipulate it. So port is beautiful in so many ways because it's one of the most natural wines possible.
Hence discovering the less is more theory for working with the port and the winery.
Well, nice.
Yeah,
Good
thank
tasting.
you. Cheers.
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 Cheers, guys.
Thanks, Claude.
Cheers.